I wasn't hunting conspiracies when I opened an 18th century newspaper and found a report that reads like a glitch in reality. At noon, the sun simply vanished, and an entire region slid into darkness. Candles were lit in kitchens, shops, and churches in broad daylight. Livestock stumbled and went silent, as if night had arrived too early. Men wrote that the air turned red at the edges, like a curtain burning. Even lawmakers paused. Sessions halted, messengers sent, prayers whispered, and every clock suddenly felt unreliable, and then it lifted again, leaving one question. The official explanation? The official explanation says the dark day was nothing supernatural at all. May 19th, 1780, New England. A strange low-pressure system, thick fog off the coast and smoke from massive forest fires drifting in from the west. Add heavy cloud cover, and you get midday dimness. Newspapers called it an odd atmospheric phenomenon. Modern meteorologists repeat it. Particulates plus moisture scatter the light, turning the sun into a weak red coin. People panicked because they didn't understand aerosols. That's the story. Clean, scientific, almost comforting. And to be fair, parts of it fit. There were fires. There was haze. Witnesses did describe a copper-colored sky, so the case is closed, right? Except the official version quietly skips the most inconvenient details. The speed, the uniformity, the way it fell like a curtain, and the fact that some towns reported it as absolute night. That animals went silent, that churches lit candles, that a state legislature debated adjournment by lamplight, and that the darkness arrived without a storm front overhead anywhere. But that explanation assumes, except smoke and fog don't behave like a switch. They creep, they thin, they drift. But accounts from May 19th describe something else, a wall of blackness, falling fast, uniform, almost deliberate. A farmer in Massachusetts wrote that by mid-morning he couldn't read print at a window. By noon he needed candlelight to eat. So why did it darken like night, not like haze? In Hartford, the Connecticut legislature reportedly argued whether Judgment Day had arrived, then continued under lamps. That's not a gloomy afternoon. That's civic infrastructure reacting to emergency. So why did lawmakers treat it as existential? And here's the strangest part. Animals. Chickens went to roost. Frogs began their night chorus. Cattle stopped grazing. Nature doesn't take votes. It follows light. So why did every instinct flip at once? Even observers trying to stay scientific noted a reddish rim at the horizon, as if the sun was smothered behind layers. Ezra Stiles at Yale logged it as an extraordinary darkness, noting people could not see and that common rules failed. If it was just smoke, just weather, just fog, why did it feel manufactured? Here's where the pattern starts to emerge. The dark day isn't terrifying because it was dark. It's terrifying because it sits right on a seam in history, one of those seams that later gets stitched over, relabeled, and filed away. Pull up maps from the 1700s and early 1800s, and you keep seeing the same ghost word, Tartary, Tartaria, a vast region stretching across Eurasia. Sometimes broken into great and independent Tartary, sometimes drawn with borders that feel confident. Then, as the century turns, that confidence evaporates. The word shrinks, it fragments, it gets reattributed, absorbed into newer names, newer empires, newer obvious explanations. Now line that up with the anomalies, the sudden darkness, the reports of skies like smoke-black velvet, the strange red rim, the panic in churches and government halls. One era's witnesses describing a world behaving wrong, the next era's cartographers describing a world that never existed. And in that window, architecture gets dated, cities get an inheritance story, and anything that doesn't fit is buried, scrubbed, and called folklore. Maybe Tartaria really was just a vague geographic label. Maybe. But why does it fade exactly when the narrative hardens? Why do borders redraw while accounts like the dark day get sanded down into a footnote? Which brings us back to that darkened sky. And then the investigation stops being about one dark afternoon and starts being about what was left standing after it. Because if Tartaria was a system, It wouldn't only vanish on paper, it would leave fingerprints in stone. Look at the late 1800s, Chicago, St. Louis, San Francisco, entire temporary cities raised for World's Fairs, packed with ornate facades, massive domes, electric lighting, and halls that look older than the dates stamped on them. Then, conveniently, they burn, they're demolished, they're reattributed as mere spectacle. In Europe, you see the same symmetry: cathedral-like train stations, identical civic buildings, grand arches, star fort geometry etched into coastlines from the Netherlands to Japan. I can't prove this definitively, but the repetition is unnerving. The same design language, the same materials, the same "who funded this" question, and the same story afterward: inheritance, renovation, paperwork, and a new plaque with a safer date. There are photographs, blueprints, and census numbers that don't quite match the official timelines, like the infrastructure arrived before the population did. So if maps can be redrawn, why couldn't cities be inherited? And if cities were inherited, what event forced the hand? So let's model it, not as certainty, but as a sequence. What if Tartaria wasn't defeated, it was transitioned? Phase 1. A broad label on maps, a network of cities already operating, borders drawn with confidence. Phase 2. Disruption. Fires, floods, resets, the kind of chaos that breaks records and scatters populations. Phase 3. Consolidation. New administrations, new census math, new ownership claims, and the start of deliberate reattribution. Phase 4. The rebuild narrative. World's Fairs, new infrastructure, plaques, and dates that overwrite older stone. Phase 5. The cleanup. Tartaria becomes Tartary, becomes a footnote, then disappears. And in the middle of that chain sits one event that feels like a signal flare. May 19th, 1780. The dark day, not proof, a marker. The moment the sky went wrong, and history learned how to look away. So what was the dark day really? A weather event? Or a warning flare? Why does Tartaria fade as maps get cleaner? Why do we keep inheriting stone and calling it new? If you've seen a building in your city that feels out of place, drop it in the comments. Subscribe. This investigation is just beginning.